Is Tua Tagovailoa for real? That and more this week on the couch. John Daigle. John, we all saw it, but what are we supposed to think? What's the right angle on Tua Tagovailoa and Miami Dolphins in week 2?
It's not the answer everyone wants to hear, but I think the range of Tua, where he finishes, will probably be whatever happens between that 6 touchdown performance in a come from behind game script in week 2 and however he performs against the Bills in week 3. That's why it's so hard to give the right answer for redraft leagues. I understand it's more long-term thinking. So yes, you want Tua Tagovailoa, but also at the same time, like, the Bills offer one of the toughest matchups.
Right.
The good news is that the scheme has changed for Miami. Like last year, for instance, Tua completed just 50% of his passes, 10 to 19 yards within the line of scrimmage. Those intermediate routes that Mike McDaniels is clearly favoring and shines and scheming. This year, he's completing nearly 70% of those passes. Also, last year, he was in single digits of throws, 20-plus yards downfield. This year, he has a 12.5% rate of throws deep. So it is changing. Even in week 2 against the Ravens in one-score game script, he threw the Dolphins, called a league-high pass rate on early downs. They are more aggressive this year. And so there's a lot of reasons to have hope for Tua for the rest of the season. I still somewhat worry, though, in week 3, especially because there are a lot of streaming options. That's why everyone's asking, right? Because not only what Tua did, but also we got to replace Trey Lance. And there are a lot of streaming options between Carson Wentz, Jared Goff in an up-tempo matchup against Minnesota. Even Joe Flacco against the Bengals is a really good matchup too. Justin Fields, maybe we see what happens to him against the Texans. We don't think the Bears are going to average 14 pass attempts per game for the rest of the season. Maybe they will, but we don't think that will happen. So that's my concern, at least for week 3 for Tua.
Yeah, this one is sticking with me, John, because I'm remembering what it's evoking in my mind is when Chip Kelly took over the Eagles, right? And what was really telling to me was this stat about 6,134. Was that the number of the yards that the DBs ran for the Ravens? Yes. And I wonder if McDaniel, and look, first of all, as we all heralded, Mike McDaniel is different. He's different than any other head coach. And I brought this up already on a show once. My wife always talked about playing Madden and people getting annoyed with her because she just call Hail Marys on every play, right? Come on, that's not football. That's not fair. And I wonder if, especially with Waddle and Hill, if these guys have the conditioning, I wonder if McDaniel might have stumbled onto something that at least for a while will take the league a bit to catch up to. Because like the Kelly offense, the idea is wear out the defense, and then eventually they're going to make mistakes. And when they make the mistakes, boy, you're going to pounce. And I'm remembering also that Nick Foles had one of the most efficient seasons in NFL history because of the system, because of the advantages the system gave him. Now, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I'm just saying I'm open to it. I'm open to it. I'm going to be watching. And you're right that the schedule makers did us a favor unwittingly by putting Buffalo next, because we've seen Buffalo's been a buzzsaw on both sides of the ball. They're well coached. They're well prepared. You can't even tell that their number one corner is out, right? And they had another corner, one of their experienced corners, go down. It sounds like he's doing better. We saw him taken off on an ambulance. So I'm open to that. And I guess because of that, I'm encouraging people to be aggressive about Tua Tagovailoa. Obviously, it's too late to be aggressive about Hill or Waddle. What about Raheem Mostert, a name that we didn't think we'd be talking about this early in the fantasy season?
I was surprised, actually, that they went right to Mostert after Chase Edmonds was arguably a buy low candidate, given his usage in week 1. But the fact that they ran Mostert out there for 14 touches to Edmonds' 6 in this past game, and also basically allowed each other to mirror one another on third down. Like Edmonds out-snapped Mostert 8-4 on third down, but the fact that Mostert was involved at all as a RB3-4, that was surprising to me. So I think that's how I view him. But also, if it shook up once, if it shook up from week 1 to 2, we have to tell ourselves that it can obviously shake up again, especially because on one of those touches Edmund got, he went for 20-plus yards for a splash play. So that's what I'm looking at. We also know Mostert's injury history, but for the time being, that seems to be the player that Mike McDaniels favors. We obviously know their friendly history with the 49ers together.
Yeah, I'm inclined to tell folks to be aggressive. I actually put the number at 20 to 40%, and I didn't put it higher only because of the injury history, right? Because, I mean, the egg's on my face if I say, go out and get Raheem Mostert, and he gets hurt the next week, because who couldn't see that coming? But at the same time, and I've been stressing this a lot on our waiver wire show we do on Tuesday mornings, there's only 2 or 3 difference makers, maybe, on the waiver wire each year, which actually, honestly, I wonder if I'm accidentally making an argument that the waiver wire is not that important. You know, and there's a lot of people like, oh, doing my waiver claims. It might not be as important as far as the attention and time we put into it. But how many times, John, are we going to get a running back who we know is good? He's in the system that he fits in. And again, there's a potential multiplier effect of, well, that last week put defenses on notice, right? I mean, defenses facing Miami now are going to have to guard against the deep pass. There's just no way. I mean, if you're a defensive coordinator and you get beat deep multiple times by the Dolphins, it's all on you. So that should open things up for Raheem Mostert. And I will say you're right. You're right to say that we shouldn't assume, especially this early in the season when we see usage stats, that's how it's going to trend, especially if we look at the production. And in this case, I actually think the fact that Mostert was productive when he was lead back and Edmonds wasn't. And Edmonds wasn't productive on his other touches. You're right. He was central part of the comeback with that long run. I think we're going to see this settle. And I'm excited about Mostert's possibility of busting off those 70-yard runs that we remember against stressed out defenses. But look, this is all me putting a story together. But I think that's what you have to do with a waiver wire pickup. And you just say, well, would it be good? Would it help my team? And a lot of people are having trouble filling in their running back too. Lots of things to sift through. We started positive on week 1 with Miami. And again, I'm going to say, just as an aside, well, I'll just toss this out there to see what you think. And it's not specifically a fantasy football take, but I want to get this out there officially on the couch here. This seems to me, John, like the theme of the first 2 weeks of the season has been that teams that feel like they have the win locked up are letting up emotionally, and lots of teams are completing or almost completing improbable comebacks, right? Win probability. What was it in week 1? Like, 4 or 5 teams that were facing 5% win probability won or 95% win probability lost. Then we saw I think the Jets, by some calculations, were 99.9% to lose in that game after it was 30-17. Anyway, or maybe before it was 30-17, sorry, because Nick Chubb had taken a knee. That was that. And it's fascinating to me because what brings it back around, and John, maybe again, I'm unwittingly making an argument that fantasy football is silly and we just pretend to predict the future, to know how to do it. Because it reminds me, John, that the game is first and foremost an emotional game, right? You have all of the strategy of coaches. You have all of the one-on-one battles, putting physical tools against physical tools. But yet you see in these games when a team just goes, okay, we got this. Like I say, it was like walking into the ring with your gloves down. Then a previously inferior team, a team that couldn't do anything against them, just starts racking up points and sometimes pulls away at the end and gets the shocking win. And that emotional element week to week is something we can't reliably forecast. We just can't. You could even look at the Browns this week coming up on Thursday and say, wow, they got a short week. What a great week to have a short week. They're not gonna be stunned against the Steelers. The Steelers are gonna get them back up, right? Myles Garrett, Mason Rudolph, and all that. Or it could be a game that sends them into a tailspin. The Rams, and they're almost let down. The Ravens and their secondary. What do they do against the Patriots? How do they respond? I think it's really difficult to project these things, and it's why week-to-week variants are one of the main reasons.
I think what you're trying to say is where I've been at the past 2 games as well, and that is, as people who our job is to answer questions, we still have a lot of questions. And it's usually like that at the beginning of the season, but it's Tuesday ahead of week 3, and I have a headache, like when I'm diving into everything right now, because we're at the point of the season where sometimes, and it's not always suffice for us to just nod and say, yeah, but I don't think it's going to be like that, right? But that's kind of where we're at with the season right now. I don't think the Jets, as excited as we want to get about Garrett Wilson, as much as we may want to buy low on Elijah Moore, the list goes on, Michael Carter as well. Like, I also don't think Joe Flacco will attempt 50 pass attempts per game, and he's now reached that in 2 games. I don't think the Jets will finish second in plays per game, and that's where they are right now. And so we do have to tell ourselves, well, I don't think it's going to be like that. And that's not a quantitative answer. And that's what we're trying to give everyone. So I struggle to answer that right now. Everyone wants to bench Darnell Mooney. And we know the Texans have allowed the most receiving yards to opposing wideouts right now through 2 games. So I don't want to tell everyone to bench Darnell Mooney just yet either. And that's where we are at this point in the season. Maybe the Bears continue with their pass play rate on early downs below 40%. Maybe they continue just chucking it 14 times a game, but also I don't think so. And I don't think so, again, it's not a numerical answer. So I'm with you. I am just as confused as you. I don't know about the comebacks. Nick Chubb took the blame on that loss, given that he could have slid, and thus that would not allow for as much time in the fourth quarter for the Jets to score 2 touchdowns. But overall, we're just still trying to figure a lot of stuff out. Even let's say the Lions, I now hold them in higher regards because they hung with the Eagles in week 1. And we just thought, okay, well, the Lions played throughout the preseason, their starters. They practiced in pads throughout camp because, of course, Dan Campbell, maybe they were just more warmed up to the season. But now to take a 22-0 lead over the Commanders into the half, upset week 2, to hang with the Eagles, who embarrassed the Vikings in week 2. The Lions did that in week 1. Now we say, okay, actually, we probably have more respect for the Lions, given that they have a star running back in DeAndre Swift and a star wide receiver, a budding star, too. We haven't even seen his ceiling yet in Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's where I'm at with a lot of these teams and players through 2 games. I may have lost Sigmund Bloom as well. I may not be in the show either, to be honest. But I can keep talking until Sig comes back. Let's see here. Oh, we got it. New Orleans internet. That's what's happening here for Sig. All right. He'll be back shortly. We can see me. Okay. Well, I guess we can see me. Sig will be back soon then. I'm just going to keep talking. I'm going to message him real quick. I'm going to keep talking until you jump back in. There you go. He now knows that. So that's where I'm at right now with Garrett Wilson and the Jets, right? What I just talked about. Because, yes, Garrett Wilson did see his usage increase 56% route rate in week 1 to 75% in week 2. But also, do we expect... Yeah, Sig will join me in a second. I'm just going to keep talking. But also, do we expect, again, Joe Flacco to throw 50 attempts per game? Do we expect this to be an aggressive pass-heavy offense? Maybe they will be, because it's the Jets defense that are getting murdered on the interior. Boundary plays just fine, but they're getting murdered over the middle of the field. So maybe they'll have no choice but to continue throwing the ball heavily, and thus that gets Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson there. The issue is also Tyler Conklin now has a 20.4% target share through 2 games. So I don't think both receivers can get there. I think it's 1 per week, and there's no guaranteeing that it's only 1. So it's just interesting to know what's happening right now. Jacob also asked a question: what's up with Cooks and Mills? Well, the issue is Mills has been bad. The issue is, if you look at Sports Info Solutions on target rate, it's Davis Mills who's actually bottom 5 in the league, which Jared Goff is there too, but at least the Lions are scoring 35 and 36 points per game. The Lions offense, with their amazing trenches, a league high 7.2 yards per carry. They're elevating everyone and scoring points and getting Jared Goff into the red zone, whereas the Texans can't do that. Davis Mills has been terrible. So while we still lean on Brandon Cooks, who has led that team in target share in both games, and you're still flexing him, Like, we are already pretty sure Davis Mills can only get one receiver there every week, and that receiver's Brandon Cooks. That's it. No one else to worry about this time. Also, will the Wilson and the Broncos figure it out? Well, the good news is that we know all targets, all routes run go to Cortland Sutton without Jerry Jeudy moving forward. We don't know how long Jerry Jeudy will be out, but I also don't think that Russell Wilson, who is now 4 of 12 inside the 10-yard line and hasn't thrown a touchdown pass, I don't think that will continue. Maybe it will. Maybe it comes down to Nathaniel Hackett's play calling, but I don't think so. Russell Wilson also 8 of 18 inside the red zone, 44% completion rate. Compare that to Patrick Mahomes, even though that's not fair. But Patrick Mahomes, for instance, is 13 of 18 as the Chiefs just hum along. That's why I also think the Bills-Dolphins matchup is interesting. We talked about Tua a little bit, but for Josh Allen, you wouldn't know it, but he's thrown 69 passes already this year, and only 6 he's tossed 20 yards deep. Josh Allen understands how to play against 2 eye safeties. When they play deep thinking that's all the Bills are, Josh Allen will still beat you. 63% of his passes has come within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage this year. And it hasn't mattered. Stephon Diggs is second in the league in receiving yards, and he hasn't played a full game yet. He basically didn't play the fourth quarter on Monday night. And in week 1, remember, he ran fewer routes than Gabriel Davis. So, we actually haven't seen the best of the Bills just yet, Sigmund. And that's what's insane to me, that their numbers have meat on the bone everywhere. What Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense is experiencing and not understanding how to play against 2 eye safeties and not taking what the defense gives them and not calling plays better to account for the defense. The Bills know what they're doing. They're all ready to go to the Super Bowl right now.
Yeah, too bad they can't play the Super Bowl next week. Okay, I'm trying something now as New Orleans internet has not been kind to me. Thanks, folks, for your patience. And thanks, John Daigle, truly sticking with the show business. Maxim, the show must go on. And I wish I was not out in the void and I could have heard all the wonderful things. That was for the audience and the audience only, who also is sticking with us. Thank you, folks. I want to ask you about some negative things or some negative trends. All right. I tweeted out last night, and to the ire of some, that it just felt like, because I remember as I was reformatting my rankings going through August, John, I was always moving Derrick Henry and Najee Harris down another notch, right? Mm-hmm. I think by my final rankings, they were number 13 and number 15 in the overall rankings, and most importantly, behind Joe Mixon and Dalvin Cook. So giving people clear recommendations at the second half of the first round. So I don't necessarily feel that much remorse for not moving them down farther, but I wanted to move them down farther. I just felt like there's pressure, right? I mean, not Derrick Henry was even better than Jonathan Taylor before he got hurt last year. There are a lot of things suggesting he might not return to that level. Najee Harris, just sheer volume, right? Volume is king. And how much worse could it be than Ben Roethlisberger? And it ends up, at least at this moment, it sure feels like these guys are running back 2s. And maybe they'll be running back 1s in a good matchup, but there's some things that might have to change in their offenses. And I think Henry in particular, it just worries. He just doesn't look like he has the same edge. Maybe given time, he will. To me, this also brings up the pressure that ADP puts on folks, especially in the early rounds, to make a pick because, hey, if it's a first round ADP, because I saw him falling to the second round, I think people felt like they were getting a value. I don't know if they would go in the second round today. Now, this can be where you say it's going to turn around. He's going to be fine. They're going to be fine. Folks are going to be vindicated for spending a first round pick on them. Or to say, no, I'm not feeling it. What can folks expect from Henry and Harris going forward?
I was with you. I even wrote in my top 30 fades article before the season, Derrick Henry was number 1, Najee Harris was number 2. And I was just going down the list based on ADP. But I wrote that Henry was a landmine inside the top 8 of drafts where he was going in a lot of redraft leagues, whereas he was a terrific value beyond the first round turn. He may not even be that anymore, honestly. But I also wrote that there was literally no worse first round pick in fantasy than Najee Harris, just because it was clear what was going to happen to this offense, right? He was no longer going to get those Pro Football Focus had him with 43 targets behind the line of scrimmage last year, which accounted for 46% of his targets because of Ben Roethlisberger's arm. Like, he wasn't going to get those targets anymore. So the argument that, he's going to get all these touches still, and touches lead to fantasy. Like, we have the data now to parse through that and let people know, actually, like, no, these touches are not the same. They don't have the same value.
Yes.
So that was always the argument with Najee Harris. And now we're seeing that again. It's a totally different offense. It's a top 10 offense in pass play rate right now from neutral game script. They have 3 receivers they roll out there constantly. And I understand George Pickens, it may not be showing in the box score because he's totaled 6 targets so far, but he's ran as many routes as Deontay Johnson. Also, like, it was hard to get the Steelers offense right anyhow, since Deontay Johnson I had as a wide receiver 3. So after the top 24 wide receivers, because of the offensive change. But now we're seeing that hasn't mattered so far because Deontay Johnson still has recorded a 30+% target share in the first 2 games as he led the team in his first 2 years in the league. But for Derrick Henry as well, 28 coming off a Jones fracture. He returned in the playoffs and averaged 3 yards per touch. I think the writing was on the wall, and he was the anomaly, and that he still is the player in that range. If you fade, he can steal your soul from time to time. But overall, right now, the concern is also a Titans rebuild, because they came into the year with a worse offensive line on paper, at least. I mean, we're seeing what happens when we try to grade offensive lines on paper with the Bengals offensive line right now and pass pro, and knowing that Ryan Tannehill, like, if the Titans cut him after this year, they can pretty much save $23 million in cap space. So, like, the writing is on the wall for a rebuild almost. And, like, chasing a running back who depended on a league high 29 touches per game, that was not the route I wanted to go personally. And so that's what led me to think that they were fades in that range in the first round. And like you said, it's a disaster right now. Having said that, the players we took before them, right? Dalvin Cook, Austin Ekeler. I still think Dalvin Cook's a buy low because he's still running a route. He's still running around in over 75% of their dropbacks. He's being used essentially as a receiver. And the past 2 years, when healthy, he's finished top 3 among all running backs in touches per game. Obviously, those touches have not been there the first 2 games. So I still want to be all in on Dalvin Cook, but also for those players that we faded those other 2 for, it hasn't been great at all either.
No. Now, if you took them over like Stephon Diggs, I mean, you even feel better with Devontae Adams. You might give it a few weeks. You might even feel better with CD Lamb. I would be interesting. One of the things, and I want to say that you can draft best ball leagues during the season, because what would ADP data look like if we were drafting today for leagues that run through the rest of the season, where Henry and Harris would fall? Because I have a feeling that even if before the season you convince yourself volume and history, etc., when it comes time in the second round to make your pick today, you still might have trouble because of all those negative indicators you're talking about. And I think that there's some things, and again, I feel like one of the biggest, maybe it's Twitter, maybe it's the way that Twitter amplifies certain voices or otherwise, what draws the most engagement, because it feels like usage stats are becoming just almost like the language of fantasy football now. Mm-hmm. But as you said, not all touches are created equal. Not all routes run are created equal. Not all targets are created equal. Look at DeAndre Swift. How many touches did he get last week? I don't remember off the top of my head.
I believe it's 7.
7.
And he averaged 12 yards per touch on 50% of the snaps with an ankle injury. And it didn't matter at all.
Yeah, he was one of the best plays of the week, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm not trying to cherry pick here, but I just think that usage is one clue. And you mentioned Cook, you mentioned Ekeler. And I think with Cook's still very good. I still think the Vikings offense is good. As Eric Stoner, who's here right now, always an honor. Just that someone like Eric Stoner would spend his time with us. He texted me last night, like Cousins on Monday night. It's just like watching him get dismantled mentally. There's something to it. I don't want to be superstitious about it, but there's just something to what happens to him. But I still think we're going to see them play Detroit this week. Everyone's going to be okay. I think everyone's going to be okay. Like you said, buy low on Cook and get in quick, because the buy low window is going to be short, assuming what we've seen from Detroit is going to hold defensively. Now, Detroit's defense might get better as the year goes on. You mentioned Ekeler. I think Eckler's a really good example of how usage is a backwards looking indicator. not a forwards-looking indicator. Because, yes, they gave some touches to Sony Michel and Joshua Kelly in places near the goal line that we would want Ekeler to get those touches, right? 20 total touchdowns last year. That was one of the keys to putting him in the top 5 or 6 of drafts. But what did Michel and Kelly do on those touches? Nothing. I mean, they look like guys who weren't deserving of those touches. So go ahead. You add.
Well, also for Ekeler right now, the floor is there. That's what's keeping him around. Like 18 and 23 touches in his first 2 games, 10 targets this past week, is tied now with Gerald Everett, oddly enough, and Mike Williams for a team high in target share. They have the same target share through the first 2 games. So like Eckler's floor is there. That's what's keeping him around, really. Now, was it worth adding that floor with the top 5 pick since we faded the other running backs for him? And thus, since it was a top 5, top 6 pick, we then probably faded Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, or Devontae Adams? No, it's not worth that right now, at least. But that's kind of where we're at with Ekeler, is that at least he's getting by, because the others aren't even getting by. They're giving you nothing.
No, and Ekeler maybe should have been closer to where Aaron Jones was. Maybe Ekeler and Aaron Jones look more similar than we had them, where we had Ekeler clearly leading a backfield. Jones isn't clearly leading the Packers backfield, but he reminded us on Sunday night that you ride the ups and downs. I think that's just going to be the nature of running backs this year. You ride the ups and downs so that you can occasionally running back. It just popped into my head, John. Is running back the new tight end? Is running back the new position where you just ride out ups and downs? You get talents, you get players in blow up potential situations, but you know that it's not going to be consistent.
That's a good point. Probably right now, because the issue is it's very top heavy as it stands, and we're still trying to sift through which players are buy low, which players are actually performing. Even like for Jonathan Taylor, for instance, it was amazing in week 1 to see him handle 35 touches in a game that the Colts trailed 20-3 at one point. Like, oh, this is the nuts. Like Jonathan Taylor in negative game script as well. This is the player I want. But then, and I think there are reasons for this past week, right? Like the Colts ran 90 plays in week 1. They then had to travel cross country to play their next game on an early kickoff. So there is reason to believe they probably were going to fail that game anyhow. But still, just 10 touches for Jonathan Taylor. That's a disaster. So right now, like you mentioned, redoing it all again, it has to be Cooper Kupp. It can't even be, it's not even close, because the one person who just doesn't fail is Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, and Amon-Ra St. Brown would go ahead of Henry and Harris. Yeah, I mean, if you were on the clock in the draft right now in the second round, Amon-Ra St. Brown is there. You're taking him over Henry and Harris.
And it goes back to last year. We now have 8 consecutive games where Amon-Ra St. Brown has recorded at least a 29% target share. In the first 2 games, 32 and 35%, and he scored a touchdown in 6 consecutive games. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, we all asked who the Cooper Kupp of 2022
it's
is.
St. Brown,
and a lot of us answered Juju Smith-Schuster as an every down slot receiver, not coming off the field from Patrick Mahomes. The good news is Juju Smith-Schuster hasn't come off the field. He is their slot receiver, but we've also seen he's not separating right now. It can get shut down like he did in week 2, whereas Amon-Ra St. Brown, no one's shutting him down. And not only is no one shutting him down, the Lions are figuring out what he can do. Like they gave him 2 end arounds this past week. One of them went for 40+ yards. So they're saying, oh, like not only can he do this, we can also use him like this. So we haven't seen the ceiling yet.
Yeah, like Deebo Samuel. Yes. And look, I'm not a big fan of victory laps. Okay. I'm not a big fan of like calling people out. We're all going to get a lot of things wrong. Newsflash. Every fantasy expert. Yeah. Right. Also gets some things right. So we're all going to get things terribly wrong. We all are. The Amon-Ra St. Brown one, I feel like, was a bit egregious, simply because in addition to what we saw him do, and you can say it was because there wasn't a lot of surrounding talent, targets by default, but rookies don't do that. Even rookies in situations where they're unobstructed for targets, they don't do what Amon-Ra St. Brown did. Again, it's part of something only Michael Thomas and Antonio Brown have done in NFL history. And every anecdotal narrative indicator in the offseason said this was real. The offensive coordinator who was pretty much behind it became, I mean, he wasn't the offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, then, but he became offensive coordinator. You've got beat writers saying the offense is going to run through him and so on. And I think that this was one that was a low-hanging fruit by the time we got to late drafts. But it does bring up something, like I was saying, John. we're all going to get a lot of things wrong. We're all going to get a lot of things right. Henry and Harris, for instance. If anything, I regret not pushing them farther down. The pressure that kept them higher on my final board, because I really do look at my rankings, John, in the preseason and my rankings in season. My rankings in the preseason are basically draft, consider, do not draft. And similarly, when we're doing our weekly rankings, it's like start them, consider starting them, don't start them. And I know that rankings as a list and accuracy and things like that, I think, I don't know if Fantasy Pros does this anymore, but they used to take like the most important, the biggest outliers of the week, both up and down, and then run down who was closest, right? What's important about your rankings isn't matching in some sort of total accuracy average way. It's how did you get these 20 players? These players that were the farthest from expectations. Were you on the low side? Did you warn people away from them? Did you nudge people towards them? Were you on the high side? And likewise for drafts, because something we can all say about our preseason rankings are they're going to be wrong. And in some ways, the more your rankings look like the consensus rankings, the less defensible they are, because anybody can look up consensus rankings and draft off of consensus rankings. If you're not locating players far from the norm on the consensus rankings, you're not saying anything interesting with your rankings. Now, granted, don't just rank players way outside the norm for the sake of it. Say why. I mean, that's what's most interesting is the why. But I'm curious what you think about this, and just as an expert, quote unquote, expert content creator, what we do, how that affects how you put together your rankings, and just the pressure to not stray too far from the norm versus saying something that is actionable to folks by straying from the norm.
This is something actually the great Rich Rebar and JJ Zachariason have discussed in podcasts throughout the offseason, because I usually listen to all the content throughout the offseason. It's football. You use it when you go on runs, when you go for walks, whatever. And they've mentioned a ton of times that projecting the RB 10, like saying rather than this player who ADP is RB 16, but we want to be ahead because we want to draft him as the RB 10. Like, that's pretty much useless practice. Like, it doesn't matter. You're kicking the can for a floor. Who cares?
Yeah.
Unless you're projecting that player for an RB 1, like truly a top 3 ceiling, then who cares? Just don't worry about fighting for it. For instance, this year, I think when you get to that 5th, 6th round range in drafts, then that's when the Chase Edmonds, let's see who else was there. Miles Sanders, Elijah Mitchell, AJ Dillons were coming off the board, and they're fine picks. But again, we're just kicking the cans on RB2s. Like, it doesn't matter whether we jumped ADP on them when the game of football, fantasy football, suggested, oh, actually, Jalen Hurts and Kyler Murray are in this range instead. Like, why would you go for this player whenever a player of that ceiling, and we're seeing it from Jalen Hurts, it's only 2 games, we're seeing it right now, though, that ceiling, you don't want to fade that. Because playing the game then also allows you to get that kind of ceiling rather than wasting another pick on other quarterbacks. The Chiefs, we have faith in the Chiefs offense, but the Chiefs can still go either way, since we've now seen them play the Cardinals defense, which apparently they're going to stop absolutely no one this year. And then the Chargers, who showed another way, like teams did the second half of last year, showed a way, okay, you can actually slow down and stop the Chiefs if you play them this direction. So I think just keeping in mind that we're just playing the overall game, not player takes. And yes, we got to get the players right. But for instance, also, I had argued, and other people argued as well. Well, it definitely wasn't just me. Pro Football Focus' Ian Harditz, Dwayne McFarland as well, you as well. Like, we argued about Amon-Ra St. Brown because, well, one, once you see what he can do, once he sees he can win leagues in both in reality and fantasy, then how could the Lions ever disperse his targets? How could they ever put that away on the bench? They just couldn't, and we're seeing that now. But also, the players he was being drafted around, Adam Thielen, Drake London is doing just fine, but Drake London is not Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so that was the argument again. It's like, and Brandon Ayuk, for example, it's like, well, these players don't win your leagues, whereas Amon-Ra St. Brown showed his range of outcomes. His range of outcomes includes a top 5 ceiling. So why would I not chase that in this range? So again, you got to get the players right. But just understanding the range of outcomes, first of all, and then playing the game and where players are being drafted. That's I thought was like the most important part, not just a fantasy football draft in general, but this year in particular, it seemed to really stand out.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it continues to change. Paying this close attention to football like we do, you're going to feel every little bump, everything, the princess and the pea. You're going to feel it all. And sometimes what we're feeling, it's like the elephant, the blind man with the elephant. And what we're really feeling is the game changing, right? And some of this, the league does change and does adopt. The league is actually, I think, much more nimble. Not some coaches and some organizations, but I want a bunch of different things going through my head here. Number one, and we've already talked about this, right? You mentioned the variance on some of these players from one week to the next, right? Justin Jefferson and the environmental factors he had to deal with on Monday night. Devontae Adams, who knew that Byron Murphy could be a shutdown corner? Byron Murphy probably did. It looked like the Carr and Adams had the old pitch and catch going, right? Jamar Chase looked like he was going to single-handedly rescue this offense, not as much against the Cowboys, and so on. And again, this is why I wonder if On the Couch, John, is eventually going to turn into just an argument against fantasy football. I don't want to do that. I like fantasy football. It's what I've made my career around, right? But just that the environmental factors matter so much, that the player's talent or even the things that we can fix about their usage or how they're going to be deployed is not necessarily the biggest factor or one of the biggest factors of how their bottom line stats turn out in any given week. And I just think it's going to be interesting as more and more people are playing fantasy football and more and more great minds among the experts, and we're tracking this all week to week. And one of the things that I think is going to be interesting is like it's definitely something I've backed off on the longer I've been doing this, John, is not projecting certainty. Like really just acknowledging that even though certainty makes your name as a pundit or certainty can drive engagement and things like that. Yeah. But if you actually feel like you're certain about this stuff, that's when you're about to get hit by a train.
And honestly, we should question ourselves anyways. The Kyle Pitts hype train, for example, was so strong that I got suckered in, and I
did it last year. I was the one, the conductor last year, so I couldn't do it 2 years in a row.
If you read my Falcons team preview at 4-for-4-2, my initial thoughts is what I should have stuck with, because I even wrote that the fact Kyle Pitts is going 2 rounds before Darren Waller and George Kittle is insane. Because no one can tell you in this Falcons offense, I projected the Falcons to be the worst team, given fumble luck. Their offensive line got worse. Their quarterback play got worse. And so it's like, okay, this is actually a pretty easy team to point to regression towards and to be one of the worst offenses in the league. And that's what's happening. But we also have, we have 19 career games for Kyle Pitts, and he scored 10 plus fantasy points in half-point PPR leagues and only 3. And so the fact that in better offenses for the Raiders, high-octane passing offense, and the 49ers, which it actually helps George Kittle that Jimmy Garoppolo's back under center.
Right. Helps everybody.
It made no sense that Kyle Pitts is going 2 rounds before them because everyone was just looking at 1,000 receiving yards. But then for fantasy, you have to ask, when were those 1,000 receiving yards useful? And it really was 3 games. The other times, it just didn't matter. Like, great. You're then drafting a top 3 tight end who was basically a tight end 10. You're doing it terribly. And so the fact I came off my stance just because I didn't want my mentions to burn and I wanted to get along with everyone. I'm upset at myself. I'm not upset at everyone else because Kyle Pitts is fun to roster. Like, he's a fun player, but also we just need to understand that he's not used intricately. Like Arthur Smith has no idea how to use him except to throw him out wide. That's why we go to social media every morning and everyone cites his snaps from out wide. He's not schemed like Justin Jefferson, right? He's not schemed with targets against linebackers and safeties. Kyle Pitts is consistently asked to beat the best opposing defender on every team. And you're not going to get a pick play. You're not going to get a special route. You're just going to be Kyle Pitts, get out there, try to beat him. That's it. And that's not great for fantasy. Kyle Pitts maybe can beat them, but that also means he's the most volatile tight end weekly. And volatility, as we know, doesn't necessarily lead to positivity. It can also lead to the bottom falling out. And that's what's happening with Kyle Pitts right now.
Yeah, that's a wonderful summary of it, because I think that at some point, Kyle Pitts is going to learn enough tricks and his physical advantages are going to tilt it. And I know we saw that play in the preseason, Bryce Hall, when he just flew past Bryce Hall. And I know even Eric Stoner, my man, was like, whew, this is going to, I'm often a year early on players. Like, you were a year early on Kyle Pitts. And I'm open to it. Like you said, it's fun. This is fun. Trying to get those transcendent players, trying to hitch a ride on a comet. It's one of the most fun things in fantasy football, and one day he will be. But it doesn't look like it's going to be now. And like you said, with the the way they're asking him to just beat guys one-on-one, the best defender on the opposing defense. Marcus Mariota is not the quarterback that's still going to force. If he was playing with Matthew Stafford or something like that, if he was playing with a different quarterback, maybe it could still work out. Now, granted, going back to those 3 games last year where he was good, there will be games this year he blows up. And it's just going to be based on defenses taking a ridiculous approach to him. And maybe Seattle's that team. Go ahead.
My argument for Mariota, too, it was the Falcons' schedule at the beginning of the year, coupled with everything else. And now they're 0-2. And look at their next 3 games. The Browns, the Bucks, and the 49ers. I don't know how long Marcus Mariota lasts under center. And not for anything he's doing. It's just because they're going to have to scapegoat somebody if Arthur Smith doesn't get fired. And they're not going to fire Arthur Smith, I assume. And they're going to scapegoat the quarterback naturally, especially when they spent a 3rd-round investment in another quarterback. So we're seeing Desmond Ridder. And that's why, we all do the waiver wire. And I can't suggest Marcus Mariota because I don't know when he's getting benched, especially because the first 2 games, he has thrown or fumbled. He's caused a late turnover in the 4th quarter when the Falcons have kind of schemed a little bit of a comeback and been a sneaky backdoor cover. It's been Mariota's fault that they haven't done that. So I'm worried about Mariota for sure.
Yeah, I think out of Ridder and Willis and Pickett, Ritter's going to see the field first because of a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. Not to mention that because of the division that he's in, they're likely to fall out of playoff contention first. And they haven't drafted a 1st-round quarterback yet. So I think they want to see what they have in Ridder because folks are seeing what's going on with Jalen Hurts. And hey, I think it's awesome. I think it's wonderful justice that anybody who believed in Jalen Hurts is getting handsomely rewarded in fantasy football right now. I love that. And I'm not saying I was one of them. I did put him as one of my preferred choices in the draft day game plan, but I wasn't pounding the table for him. And I'm not sure. I know there were some analysts that were, and I think they that was one of the most important calls of the year, right? If we were doing a fantasy analyst report card, John, we probably again could boil it down to, and we're only 2 weeks in, so it's going to change. But we could boil it down to say 25 players, and 80% of your grade is going to be based on 25 players. And we might even take the top 5 and say 40% of your grade is just these 5 calls. Where were you at on one of these players? Jalen Hurts is one of those players. And everything else, how you did on everybody else is only 10 or 20% of your grade. Because there's really just, it's the players that deviate most from our expectations, manifesting through ADP. So I have remorse. I have remorse about not pounding the table for Jalen Hurts because he seemed like the one that could really take that leap just because of what the Eagles were doing. Go ahead. When you want to say something on Hurts specifically?
To be fair, it's only 2 weeks though. So, we don't need to give ourselves L's or victory lap through 2 games. That's why I don't even really talk about players on social media because that's immediate victory lapping. And we are removed now from best ball and draft strategy. We will take our L's in the offseason and learn from that and get better. But right now, this is where we give people an advantage, is the week to week game. Because like you mentioned, everyone wanting the sexy player, like that explosive ceiling in a Kyle Pitts. Yes, but also we're trying to win fantasy football. So as enticing as rookie receivers might be, these George Pickens, right? Chris Olave, who you talked about, stats as well. Things are not
air
the
yards.
same. Yeah, area. I mean, the Chris Olave are prayer yards. Jameis Winston's
love it.
Did
you coin that?
I've said it for the last couple years.
Prayer yards.
I don't know if I said it one night on a
I'm going to make
show,
sure to
Pick
signal
Six
you
show.
that one.
Okay, but everyone assumes that all air yards then come to fruition. But Drew Lock, for instance, air yards, those are prayer yards. They don't matter at all. Trevor Lawrence rookie year, DJ Shark, for instance, that's usually the guy I go to, DJ Shark from Trevor Lawrence, because those are prayer yards. They don't matter at all. And I think that's what we're seeing with Jameis Winston this year, given his on target rate. It's the fact that those are prayer yards. They don't matter at all. Whether Chris Olave has 350 every single week for the rest of the season, it doesn't matter to me because prayer yards are different than air yards. And so we want to be ahead of these rookie players, but also we need to win our games. And so it's fun to have Chris Olave. It's fun to have Garrett Wilson. But who actually started Garrett Wilson this week? No one. Right. And then of course we start them next week and there's no guarantee. Maybe it's Elijah Moore. So I understand how important it is to have the breakout player, but we also need to understand we need players to fill in while these players are trying to break out. Sky Moore is doing you nothing right now. Absolutely nothing. So it's fine to stash him hoping he finds a role, but maybe he just doesn't find a role at all given he's a MAC receiver.
Yeah, Mac receivers. No, prayer yards. I mean, that's one of them. You stopped me in my tracks. That's a good one. I'm totally going to give you credit every time I use that because I think it stands for the concept that I was getting at of these usage stats aren't still aren't necessarily a golden thread that follows you,
No.
that you lead you to fantasy value because you have to put them in context, always in context.
Correct.
And so that is wonderful. And Garrett Wilson, we'll see. I'm curious about the magical thinking, how it'll affect the Jets to have this ridiculous comeback, and if it energizes the team and galvanizes them in a way. And Garrett Wilson, who got that touchdown. You might say that Garrett Wilson's touchdown shouldn't have even happened, and we wouldn't be talking about him. But he did look like an electric player, and he was part of one for Robert Saleh and one for this franchise that could turn things around. But where I was going to go with that, the Jalen Hurts talk, John, is I know you said you're not thinking big picture as much for week to week, but what is something that you were saying or not saying, or the intensity of your saying it should have been less or more, that you do feel remorse about? Again, the emotional intelligence as a fantasy analyst of looking back and saying, I wish I had said something different.
I'm trying to think about my worst call this offseason. It's not fair, really, because I think I don't want to give myself an L for James Robinson because it didn't make sense that he would come out.
James Robinson doesn't make sense. He's never made sense. See,
that's
James
true
Robinson
too.
James Robinson. I made this exact argument on the Established Run with Evan, and it's like James Robinson not making sense makes sense.
That's actually a good point. Yeah. Just the fact that he has literally been the better player than Travis Etienne. Every single yard James Robinson rushed for on Sunday came after contact. Every single yard. Like, what is he doing? And not only that, but to be the better player in pass protection and in receiving than Travis Etienne, a profiling receiving back. Like, James Robinson just earns more touches every single week because he's outplaying Travis Etienne every single week. And I did argue that Etienne's ceiling was squeezed out at the second, third round turn where he reached in FFPC leagues later on. But at the same time, like, James Robinson outplaying Travis Etienne, that's what blows my mind. I'm curious what happens also with CeeDee Lamb. That's kind of a player I'm fascinated by because we all, like, I think he was a sell high, but nowadays, even saying buy low, sell high, it's almost impractical. Like, it doesn't even exist because everyone's so locked in. And so what happened is that CeeDee, in my opinion, off of 11 inaccurate targets, prayer targets don't work as well as prayer yards, but 11 inaccurate targets from Dak Prescott and Cooper Rush. He saw 11 targets again in week 2, and he's actually now seen the most inaccurate targets of any player with at least 10 targets in the league. So, like, I don't think really, if he keeps getting jammed double-digit targets, sure, he's going to eventually get there due to volume. But I don't think like these are like relevant targets really that lead him to be a wide receiver 2 as long as Cooper Rush is under center. At the same time, though, he is worth buying low right now. He is worth actually buying because I don't even think you need to start him in the next 4 games. Like, you can actually just stash him, even if he's a wide receiver 30 to 35 right now. You stash him for the next month, and then you can have him for the second half of the season. So what to me became, I'm trying to sell him. I gauged it, and then everyone was still treating him as, if you had him, everyone treated him as the first, second round turn player he was. And there was no way anyone in your league was going to give you that return after week 1, especially with Dak Prescott injured. So it was sell high, and then it became, actually, we need to buy low because everyone else in the league is smart too. And so, like, my opinion has changed on CeeDee Lamb drastically in 24 hours.
Yeah. Well, again, because part of that equation, and as a fantasy analyst, it's important that you know what the conventional wisdom is. And it's not just the ADP, but it's also the way all these different things are connected, like you said, because you're not going to get ADP during the season. You're not just going to be able to gauge it by what's in your mentions and things like that. It really comes down to things like trade offers or what players are going for. I think it's maybe DLF that does like the list of all the dynasty trades. I mean, that's at least something. That's a data point, because I think you're right that it's one thing to say in the rankings people might be moving CeeDee Lamb down to wide receiver 25. It's another thing to say that when you actually have skin, because you have no skin in the game when you do rankings. I mean, we kind of have skin in the game because we're going to be judged by our rankings, but we all turn the page so fast that honestly your mistakes just get washed in the washing machine. But you have to put skin in the game when you make a trade. And so you might have CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver 25 or 30 in your rankings. You might even bench him until Dak Prescott is back, depending on what you have. But when you see that trade offer, emotionally, again, you're still going to value him as like wide receiver 10 or wide receiver 8 or something like that. And you're not going to back off of it as much as you think you would have. Although still, I think CD Lamb, when I heard Stephen Jones say the goal of the offensive, the play caller should be to get in third and short. But we'll see. We'll see if the ghost of Jason Garrett is still going to haunt this offense. We'll see if Dak Prescott we want Dak Prescott to do what Derek Carr did with Devontae Adams in week 1, what Joe Burrow did with Jamar Chase. You have a guy who's going to win. Go to that guy. We'll see. Although this team could also be back to being a very balanced team. A lot of things to look forward to. Go ahead.
I think also, I don't think anything so far has been like immensely shocking in the league just yet. Like even for Tua and the Ravens, like we figured the Dolphins would be fun, but we didn't know if they would be good. And I still have questions if they're like above average team, but we at least know they're fun. That's not surprising. And so like, I'm trying to think of things. That's why I want to actually spin this back to you. Like, what do you think is something you've been shocked about so far? Because even let's go Seattle. DK Metcalf had a 4-yard depth of target in week 1, and they did give him more deep targets in week 2, but also they haven't reached 50 plays in a game yet. And I don't think that's shocking. Like they were supposed to logically increase their plays per game after finishing with a league low last year, and it's not happening, but also not shocking. I think if you had to ask me, I guess it's for me anyways, that's why I'm curious to get your thoughts. For me, it's how the Bucs are playing, because everyone cites the receiver injuries for this team now being a pass heavy or a run heavy offense that literally churns through Leonard Fournette, and that's it. Like even this past game, Rachaad White had 2 touches. He's a non-factor. This offense literally, if Leonard Fournette fails, this offense will fail right now. And so maybe that's due to their receiver injuries, but also given their offensive line coming into the year, this could be their identity this year. Lean on an elite defense and just get by with a run-heavy, not only game script, but on early downs as well, because they're not attacking either on first and second down.
Yeah, well, I think you're right about Tampa. We had as a fantasy bonanza, and you see lots of things going on with the offensive line and wide receivers. And Green Bay's coming to town this week, and their front 7 is a handful. Shocking things. I mean, again, I'm really fixated on these losses that teams have let slip through their fingers, and it's created outcomes of games and points too, and fantasy stats that may be fugazis. And I think truly shocking, John, how about the Bengals? How about the Bengals offense? Sure. That they would revert back to Joe Burrow. And it's not just the offensive line, because they're middle of the pack for giving up pressures. It's Burrow not avoiding those pressures. Burrow needs to be protected from himself, to be honest. It's kind of an Andrew Luck. I don't think Andrew Luck needed to be protected from the people that were running him out there every week, but he did protect himself. Good for him. He's happy. But you're right to say that not too many things have been truly shocking yet. But buckle up. And you're also right to say, just paint this picture. I almost think of it. One of the things I want to remind people of is that we have seasons within the season, like Cecil says, windows, and almost like a biopic, John, where there's like the part when they're flying high and everything's great, but then that creates the flaws that cause the downfall. And then what happens in the end? Do they pick themselves back up, or do they stay down on the ground? Like we're going to see stretches, because another thing that is shocking is just how I knew Philadelphia's offense could take a step up, but I mean, they just look like they are checkmating teams. They are
and they have the easiest projected schedule the rest of the way too. Like it's a boon right now. If you have Jalen Hurts,
they might
AJ
all
Brown,
be buy highs. Or Miles Sanders or Devontae Smith or Dallas Goedert, all of them. They might be buy highs. And maybe in this age when buy low and sell high doesn't mean anything. How about sell low and buy high? Maybe that's the smart angle now. Because again, you got to go against conventional wisdom in some way, and the conventional wisdom is buy low, and you're right that it shouldn't be. All right, we went into our off the rails time, but you helped us out when the show must go on. But I do want to mention, I've got my Doc Ellis shirt. I can get a number of Doc Ellis stories. No, the documentary. Everyone needs to see it. One of just baseball used to be a different world with different people. And I tweeted out this morning, I'm going to see Thundercat tonight. Got to meet him, shake his hand, tell him how much his music has meant to me. I told him, your music's got me through a lot of Sorry Joe, and a hero, really. And he's somebody who's gone through different phases in his life, got a record signed. It was beautiful. His aura is absolutely, positively glowing. John, who for you is a hero or somebody you'd be jazzed to get to shake their hand and tell them what their work means to you, or somebody that their story, when you heard it, you felt like it spoke to you and it's someone you kind of truck with?
There are two men. I don't get starstruck, but I think two men that I would really like to just thank them. One is, well, his name in wrestling is Jon Moxley.
Okay.
And I am a big wrestling fan, but it's also just the fact that he's definitely been my favorite. But when he started on the indies, he actually played so in wrestling, for those that don't know, your character, when you make it big anyways, your character is basically you amped up to 15. You just take it and you hyperbolize your personality. And Jon Moxley actually played a character in his indies when he first started, a individual with mental health issues. Like if you go back to YouTube and look up old Jon Moxley promos, it's literally just someone who's struggling, because that's who he was. And actually just recently, the past year, he went to AA and he emerged after having his first child. And so like now he's completely clean and he wrestles all over the world, not just for AEW and TNT, but all over the world, completely sober. And it's just truly something he does. And then he disappears. Like you don't know anything about his behind the scenes life, except the fact that he's married with a kid and lives in Cincinnati and everything, because he just does his passion and then wants to escape. And so just for the fact what he's overcome and how he lives his life, I admire that tremendously. And so that's someone I think is very interesting. And then also there's a man named Rich Roll. He wrote the book called Escaping Ultra, Running Ultra. I got to remember what it was, but basically his addiction with alcoholism. And then he actually ended up running, I think it was 7 Ironmans in a week, 9 days, because it got delayed a little bit. But he wrote the book Running Ultra, I think it was. And so just to overcome the obstacles life puts in front of you and to accomplish that feat is incredible as well. So I think those two guys who I would like to shake their hands and just thank them for their books and hey, this was a very positive spin on my own life.
Yeah, it's funny too, because Thundercats, 2 albums ago, Thundercats album was called Drunk. And it was very much about where he was. And on his last tour, when I saw him, he said that he's clean now. He went through a lot. I think personally, when Mac Miller died, they were really, really tight. So similar theme here, that now he's got that clarity of sobriety and purpose. And there's a theme here of 12-step programs. I could get into some details here. Like my father is a compulsive gambler. When I was a kid, I went to Gamblers Anonymous meetings with him. If anyone ever wants to talk about compulsive gambling, by the way, I'm open. I will always pick up the phone if you want help with that. But 12-step programs have value for everybody. You don't just need to be an addict. And I know whenever you ask me, this is what I'm saying these days when people ask me how I'm doing, I say, well, everything under my control is going well. And that really embraces serenity prayer. You want to change what you can and accept what you can't and have the wisdom to know the difference. And it's almost like if there's one thing, if you could give someone one instruction for how to handle the human condition and having an ego and all memories and all this different stuff that messes us up, trauma, pain, that's it, right? I also like to say we don't get to choose the story we're in, but we get to choose the part we play in that story. And that's enough, right? I mean, that's more than enough to keep you occupied for a lifetime. Go ahead.
And I'm victim to this still, but yes, you just have to remember that your emotions are not you. Like we lose to our thoughts. We don't lose to ourselves. So you just have to learn to understand, to control those thoughts. And most importantly, if you can't, to accept them and just be friendly to them. Just like welcome them and then slowly push your way back. That's what meditation is. It's just literally your mind going crazy and slowly bringing yourself back to the center thought. And again, like I'm victim. I do it all the time. I think my therapist actually suggested too that I start telling myself, oh, like you are not feeling this, or you are not this, you are feeling this. That's it. And so you just have to always remind yourself that. And so it's certainly a practice, but yeah, I completely agree that the thoughts are what makes us feel like we're losing, not us. We're all doing just fine.
Yeah. And emotions can skew our thoughts for sure. I think there's intelligence in emotions. I think there's intelligence emotions in fantasy and emotions in fantasy football.
Mm-hmm.
But it's at the same time, we have to, like you said, be able to recognize that. And I like what you're hitting about the idea. I think it's a quote misattributed to Socrates or something like everybody's in a great struggle, be kind, but at the same time, the flip side of that is like, we're all going to be okay. Where again, I come back to, we already have the greatest gift. We already won. What if the greatest thing is just getting to be a human with these 5 senses that is mobile in this world and getting to experience this? Because of all possible worlds, this one's pretty good. This one's pretty good and presents us with wonders every single day. Wonders like getting to talk to John Daigle and getting to hang out with all of you fine people. It's a beautiful thing that we get to do this, and it's a great privilege that you let us into your heads repeatedly. And I hope that you like us being there. Whoa.